A quiet afternoon turned into a nightmare when a simple act of kindness was twisted into something far darker. A young black child, just enjoying the day, suddenly found themselves accused of a crime they didn't commit. The neighbor's voice grew louder, sharper, dripping with judgment. But little did anyone know, a shocking truth was about to flip the entire situation upside down. What happens when prejudice collides with unexpected power? Stay tuned because this story will leave you speechless.
Jasmine was only 9 years old, a bright-eyed girl whose laughter carried down the sidewalks of her quiet suburban neighborhood. She loved the simplest things: chalk drawings on the driveway, climbing trees in the park, and clutching her beloved unicorn plushie wherever she went. Her world was small, safe, and filled with dreams bigger than her tiny backpack. Her mother, Angela, had worked hard to give her that stability. She was strict but loving, teaching Jasmine that kindness and respect were strengths that mattered more than anything else. Their house stood on a corner lot, painted light blue, with flower pots along the porch. Neighbors often waved as Jasmine rode her bike past their lawns, her braids bouncing in the breeze. To Jasmine, life was ordinary, but wonderful. She felt invisible in the best way, a child allowed to exist freely, to run, to play, to imagine. She loved waving at Mr. Lewis, the postman who always greeted her with candy, or helping Mrs. Patel across the street carry groceries. Her innocence was a light that seemed untouchable. But not everyone in the neighborhood saw her joy in the same way. Some eyes didn't see the playful little girl with scraped knees and wide smiles. They only saw her skin. Subtle glances, quiet whispers, and doors that shut a little too quickly were signs Jasmine was too young to recognize. That Saturday afternoon, the sun hung lazily over the rooftops, casting golden light on the cul-de-sac. Jasmine had skipped outside with her ball in one hand and her unicorn plushie tucked under her arm. She was just a child looking for adventure, moving between yards, chasing laughter wherever it appeared. To her, every front lawn was just an extension of the playground. But to one neighbor, her simple joy was something else entirely. It began with a glance through a window, then the creak of a door opening. A shadow stepped outside, sharp and heavy with suspicion. The peace of Jasmine's ordinary afternoon was about to be shattered, though she didn't yet know it. She was still bouncing her ball, humming to herself, living in a world that felt safe, completely unaware of the storm about to gather on her doorstep.
The sound of the ball bouncing against the pavement echoed through the cul-de-sac, but what should have been an ordinary rhythm quickly became the spark for something far more sinister. As Jasmine chased the ball toward the edge of a neatly trimmed lawn, the front door of a nearby house slammed open. Mrs. Turner, a white woman known for her sharp tongue and colder stares, stormed out with an expression that could freeze fire. Her voice cut through the still air, sharp and accusing. To her, Jasmine's innocent play looked like trespassing, or worse, something criminal. "Get off my property," she barked, her finger jabbing the air like a weapon. Jasmine froze. Her small hands gripped the ball tightly against her chest, her unicorn plush slipping slightly under her arm. Confusion washed over her. She had never been spoken to like this before, especially not for simply playing outside. Before Jasmine could even respond, Mrs. Turner's phone was out. Her fingers moved quickly, dialing with the certainty of someone who believed she was in the right. Jasmine didn't understand what was happening, but she recognized the words when they reached her ears. "There's a suspicious black child in my yard," Mrs. Turner hissed into the phone. Suspicious. Black. Child. The words, cruel and loaded, hung in the air heavier than the summer heat. Jasmine's heart thudded in her chest as she looked around, wondering why her skin made her a suspect. The unicorn plush pressed against her cheek as if it could protect her, but nothing about this moment felt safe. Minutes later, the distant wail of sirens sliced through the quiet neighborhood. Neighbors began peeking through blinds, stepping onto porches, whispering among themselves. Jasmine stood frozen, her knees trembling, clutching her ball as if it were a lifeline. The squad car pulled up with flashing red and blue lights painting the street in alarming colors. 2 officers stepped out, their hands resting near their belts. They didn't see a child with a toy. They didn't see innocence. They saw what Mrs. Turner had told them to see. "Get off my property." Jasmine's eyes filled with tears. She wanted to run, but her legs felt like stone. She wanted to scream for her mother, but the lump in her throat held the words hostage. The ball slipped from her hands, rolling slowly toward the curb, yet no one noticed. It was the fear on her face that told the real story. Neighbors murmured from their porches. Some looked worried, others shook their heads as if agreeing with Mrs. Turner. And in the center of it all was Jasmine, a 9-year-old girl who suddenly felt like the entire world was pointing a finger at her. The officers moved closer, their expressions hard. The unicorn plush slipped from Jasmine's arms and fell to the ground, landing in the dirt. She reached for it instinctively, but one of the officers shouted, "Don't move." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she froze in place, her little body shaking uncontrollably. And then, footsteps. Fast, determined footsteps pounding against the pavement. A voice, familiar, fierce, unshakable, pierced through the chaos. "What do you think you're doing to my daughter?" The crowd shifted. Gasps rippled through the neighbors. And for the first time, the officers hesitated. Because Angela, Jasmine's mother, wasn't just any mother. She was the police chief. The officers glanced at each other, realization dawning too late. Mrs. Turner's face drained of color as she finally recognized the storm she had unleashed. But the damage had already been done. Jasmine's innocence had been pierced, her world cracked open. And everyone on that street was about to witness what happens when racism collides with truth and authority.
The street had fallen silent, but the silence wasn't peace. It was tension stretched so tight it could shatter with a single word. Jasmine stood frozen, tears streaking her cheeks, the unicorn plush lying forgotten in the dirt. The flashing red and blue lights painted her small figure in harsh colors, making her look like a suspect instead of a child. Angela's voice cut through the air like a blade. "What do you think you're doing to my daughter?" The officers stiffened. Their authority, once unquestioned, now wavered under the weight of recognition. Angela was no stranger to them. Her reputation as police chief was solid, unshakable. She had led them through crises, taught them procedure, demanded integrity. Yet here they stood, pointing suspicion at her child, ready to treat innocence as guilt. One officer stammered, his confidence evaporating. "Chief, we were just responding to a call." Angela's gaze burned with fury. Her badge, clipped to her hip, caught the flashing lights as she stepped between Jasmine and the men who dared to see her as a threat. She spread her arms slightly, protective, unyielding. "You don't see a child here?" she demanded. "You see a threat? You see danger?" Her voice rose, echoing down the street. Neighbors leaned closer, their whispers cutting the night air. Jasmine clung to the back of her mother's leg, trembling. The moment that should have been her sanctuary, her mother's arrival, was heavy with the truth that even authority couldn't shield her from prejudice until it revealed itself. Mrs. Turner, still standing nearby, scoffed loudly. "She was sneaking around my yard. I had every right to call. You people—" The words stopped abruptly as Angela turned her gaze on her. The silence that followed was louder than any siren.
Angela didn't need to say a word. Her glare alone was enough to unravel Mrs. Turner's bravado. The neighbor's shoulder shrank, her voice caught in her throat. But Angela wasn't finished. She looked back at her officers. Draw your weapons on a child again, and you will answer for it. Not just to me, but to every single person who will see exactly what happened here tonight. Her words carried the weight of authority and truth. Neighbors exchanged uneasy glances. Phones began to rise, cameras recording, the glow of screens capturing every detail. The story was no longer contained to this cul-de-sac. The officers dropped their hands from their belts, shame flashing in their eyes. But the damage was already done. The fear on Jasmine's face, the tears staining her cheeks, the way her small hands trembled against her unicorn plush. It wasn't something that could be undone. Angela bent down, scooping her daughter into her arms. Jasmine buried her face against her mother's shoulder, her sobs muffled but heartbreaking. Angela's voice softened, but it carried enough strength for everyone to hear. No child should ever feel hunted in her own neighborhood. Her words lingered in the air, heavy and undeniable. Mrs. Turner tried to speak again, but her voice faltered. Her neighbor's eyes were on her now, not with sympathy, but with judgment. For the first time, she wasn't the accuser. She was the one exposed. The climax of that night wasn't just Angela's fury or Jasmine's tears. It was the revelation that racism, when dragged into the light, cannot hide. It shows itself in the trembling of a child, in the overreach of authority, in the silence of bystanders who finally can't look away. And as Angela stood in the glow of flashing lights, holding her daughter, her final words before the street fell into silence were sharp enough to cut the air itself. This isn't just about my child. It's about every child who's been treated like she doesn't belong. The crowd went quiet. The officers shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Turner's face drained of color. And in that moment, the entire neighborhood knew this wasn't over.
The flashing lights finally faded, one squad car after another retreating into the night. What had begun as a quiet Saturday afternoon ended with an entire street left in stunned silence. But the silence didn't feel peaceful. It was heavy, full of unspoken truths that could never again be ignored. Angela carried Jasmine back to their porch, her daughter's small body still trembling against her chest. The unicorn plush dangled loosely from Jasmine's hand, its once cheerful face now stained with dirt and tears. For Angela, the weight of the moment pressed hard against her heart. She was a police chief, sworn to protect, and yet tonight her own child had needed protecting from the very system she represented. Neighbors watched, some ashamed, some shaken, some still unwilling to admit what they had witnessed. Mrs. Turner remained by her doorway, arms folded tightly across her chest as though holding herself together. But the certainty that had once fueled her accusations was gone. She had been exposed, not only to her neighbors, but to the truth she could no longer deny. Inside the house, Angela settled Jasmine on the couch. She wrapped her daughter in a blanket, brushed her tears away, and whispered words of comfort. But Jasmine's eyes still searched the room, wide and uncertain, as though the shadows themselves now held danger. The innocence that once colored her world had been cracked, perhaps not irreparably, but deeply. "Why did she call them on me, Mama?" Jasmine's voice trembled, carrying the raw confusion of a child too young to understand the weight of prejudice. Angela held her close, struggling for words. "Because some people choose to see color before they see kindness. But that doesn't define you, Jasmine. You are loved, you are powerful, and nothing they say or do can take that away." It was a mother's promise, but also a warrior's vow. For Angela knew this wasn't just about tonight. It was about every child like Jasmine, every mother like her, every family who had ever lived with the fear of being judged before being known. Word of the incident spread in the days that followed. Videos taken by neighbors found their way online. The image of a small black girl crying under flashing police lights, while her mother, the police chief, shielded her with unyielding strength, went viral. News outlets called, community leaders demanded answers, and the conversation that Mrs. Turner had tried to spark in hate turned into something far larger, an urgent reminder of how racism still lived in the fabric of everyday life. For Jasmine, the experience left a mark. The street she once skipped down with carefree joy now felt different. But it also lit something within her, a fire born from her mother's courage and the support she hadn't expected. Classmates drew her cards, teachers reassured her. Neighbors who once stayed silent now spoke up. She began to see that though one person had tried to diminish her, countless others were ready to lift her up. Angela, too, found her role transformed. She wasn't just a mother protecting her daughter. She was a symbol of resistance against a system that too often failed to see innocence where it should. She led forums, spoke at schools, and used her voice to turn anger into education, pain into progress. But perhaps the most powerful impact wasn't in speeches or headlines. It was in the quiet moments, like when Jasmine, weeks later, picked up her ball again. For a long time, she had avoided it, associating it with the night everything had changed. But one sunny afternoon, she tucked her unicorn under her arm, bounced the ball against the driveway, and looked at her mother with hesitant eyes. Angela smiled and nodded, and Jasmine let the ball roll free again. It wasn't just play. It was reclaiming space, reclaiming joy, reclaiming the right to be a child without fear. This story is more than a single incident on a suburban street. It is a mirror reflecting the larger truth of how racism twists innocence into suspicion, how silence allows injustice to fester, and how courage, whether from a child clutching her toy or a mother standing unshakably tall, can pierce through the darkness. And now the question lingers, not just for Jasmine, not just for Angela, but for all of us. How many more children must carry scars of prejudice before we choose to see them for what they are? Children deserving of safety, laughter, and love. The next chapter in this story isn't written by Jasmine or Angela. It's written by us, by what we choose to accept, by what we choose to change, and by whether we remain silent or finally decide to speak. Because if a little girl can be treated as a threat for simply bouncing a ball, then none of us can claim we are untouched by the weight of injustice. The resolution of this story isn't just that Jasmine was protected, it's that her tears became a rallying cry, a reminder, a warning, and perhaps most of all, a challenge.